we are going to see the topic individual differences in cognitive abilities. Do you all know what do you mean by cognitive ability? Cognitive ability is a thought process including remembering, problem solving and decision making from childhood through adolescence to adulthood. It also refers to how a person perceives, thinks and gains understanding of his or her world through the interaction of genetic and learned factors. Among the areas of cognitive development are information processing, intelligence, reasoning, language development and memory. The cognitive abilities of individual differ as they grow. These differences in accordance to the age are given by Jean Piaget in his theory of cognitive development. Now let us learn the same from him. Now coming to Jean Piaget. Piaget was employed at the Binet Institute in 1920s where his job was to develop French versions of questions on English intelligence tests. He became intrigued with the reasons children gave for their wrong answers to the questions that required logical thinking. He believed that these incorrect answers revealed important differences between the thinking of adults and children. Piaget in 1936 described his work as genetic epistemology, that is, the origins of thinking. Genetics is the scientific study of where things come from, their origins. Epistemology is concerned with the basic categories of thinking, that is to say, the framework or structural properties of intelligence. What Piaget wanted to do was not to measure how well children could count, spell or solve problems as a way of grading their IQ. What he was more interested in was the way in which fundamental concepts like the very idea of number, time, quantity, causality, justice and so on emerged. Piaget was the first psychologist to make a systematic study of cognitive development. His contributions include a stage theory of child cognitive development, detailed observational study of cognition in children and a series of simple but ingenious tests to reveal different cognitive abilities. Now coming to the theory of cognitive development. Piaget's theory of cognitive development explains how a child constructs a mental model of the world. He disagreed with the idea that intelligence was a first triad and regarded cognitive development as a process which occurs due to biological maturation and interaction with the environment. Piaget's theory, first published in 1952, grew out of decades of extensive observation of children, including his own, in their natural environments as opposed to the laboratory experiments of the behaviorists. Before Piaget's work, the common assumption in psychology was that children are merely less competent thinkers than adults. Piaget showed that young children think in strangely different ways compared to adults. According to Piaget, children are born with a very basic mental structure, that is genetically inherited and involved, on which all subsequent learning and knowledge is based. The goal of the theory is to explain the mechanisms and process by which the infant and then the child develops into an individual who can reason and think using hypotheses. To Piaget, cognitive development was a progressive reorganization of mental process as a result of biological maturation and environmental experience. Children construct an understanding of the world around them and then experience discrepancies between what they already know and what they discover in their environment. Coming to the three basic components to Piaget's cognitive theory. There are three basic components to Piaget's cognitive theory. They are, the first one is schemas. What do you mean by schemas? It is just but building blocks of knowledge. The second one is equilibrium, assimilation and accommodation. What do you mean by that? That is adaptation process that enable the transition from one stage to another. Coming to the third, stages of cognitive development. He discussed the stages of cognitive development as sensory motor stage, pre-operational stage, concrete operational stage and formal operational stage. Now coming to schemas. Piaget in 1952 defined a schema as a cohesive, repeatable action sequence possessing component actions that are tightly interconnected and governed by a core meaning. In more simple terms, Piaget called the schema the basic building block of intelligent behavior, a way of organizing knowledge. Indeed, it is useful to think of schemas as units of knowledge, each relating to one aspect of the world including objects, actions and abstract, that is theoretical concepts. Wordsworth in 2004 suggests that schemata be thought of as index cards filed in the brain, each one telling an individual how to react to incoming stimuli or information. When Piaget talked about the development of a person's mental process, he was referring to increases in the number and complexity of the schemata that a person had learnt. When a child's existing schemas are capable of explaining what it can perceive around it, it is said to be in a state of equilibrium, that is a state of cognitive or mental balance. Example, a person might have a schema about buying a meal in a restaurant. The schema is a stored form of the pattern of behavior which includes looking at a menu, ordering the food, eating it and paying the bill. This is an example of a type of a schema called a script. Whenever they are in a restaurant, they retrieve this schema from memory and apply it to the situation. The schemas Piaget described tend to be simpler than this, especially those used by infants. He described how as a child gets older, his or her schemas become more numerous and elaborate. Piaget believed that newborn babies have a small number of innate schemas even before they have had much opportunity to experience the world. These neonatal schemas are the cognitive structures underlying innate reflexes. These reflexes are genetically programmed into us. For example, babies have a sucking reflex which is triggered by something touching the baby's lips. A baby will suck a nipple, a comforter or dummy or a person's finger. Piaget therefore assumed that the baby has a sucking schema. Now coming to assimilation and accommodation. Jean Piaget in 1952 viewed intellectual growth as a process of adaptation. It is also called as adjustment to the world. This happens through assimilation, which is using an existing schema to deal with a new object or situation. Coming to the example, A 2-year-old child see a man who is bald on top of his head and has a long frizzy hair on the sides. To his father's horror, the toddler shouts, "Clown, clown." Coming to accommodation. This happens when the existing schema does not work and needs to be changed with a new object or situation. We will see an example. In the clown incident, the boy's father explained to his son that the man was not a clown and that even though his hair was like a clown's, he wasn't wearing a funny costume and wasn't doing silly things to make people laugh. With this new knowledge, the baby was able to change his schema of clown and make this idea fit better to a standard concept of clown. Coming to equilibration. This is the force which moves development along. Piaget believed that cognitive development did not progress at a steady rate but rather in leaps and bounds. Equilibrium occurs when a child's schemas can deal with most new information through assimilation. However, an unpleasant state of disequilibrium occurs when the new information cannot be fitted into existing schemas. Equilibration is the force which drives the learning process, as we do not like to be frustrated and will seek to restore balance by mastering the new challenge. Once the new information is acquired, the process of assimilation with the new schema will continue until the next time we need to make an adjustment to it. Now coming to the stages of development. Piaget proposed 4 stages of cognitive development which reflect the increasing sophistication of children's thought. The first stage is sensory motor stage, that is from birth to the age of 2 years. Second one is pre-operational stage, this is from age 2 to age 7. The third one is concrete operational stage, that is from age 7 to age 11, and the fourth final most stage is formal operational stage. It is at the age of 11 plus to adolescence and adulthood. Each child goes through the stages in the same order and the child development is determined by biological maturation and interaction with the environment. Although no stage can be missed out, there are individual differences in the rate at which children progress through stages, and some individuals may never attain the later stages. Piaget did not claim that a particular stage was reached at a certain age, although descriptions of the stages often include an indication of the age at which the average child would reach each stage. Sensory motor stage, that is from birth to 2 years. Infancy, this stage is also called as infancy. The main achievement during this stage is object permanence, that is knowing that an object still exists even if it is hidden. It requires the ability to form a mental representation, that is a schema of the object. In this period, which has 6 sub-stages, intelligence is demonstrated through motor activity without the use of symbols. Knowledge of the world is limited but developing because it is based on physical interactions and experiences. Children acquire object permanence at about 7 months of the age, that is memory. Physical development, mobility allows the child to begin developing new intellectual abilities. Some symbolic, that is language abilities are developed at the end of this stage. Coming to pre-operational stage, that is from 2 to 7 years, and it is also called as toddlerhood and early childhood. During this stage, young children are able to think about things symbolically. This is the ability to make one thing, a word or an object, stand for something other than itself. Thinking is still egocentric and the infant has difficulty taking the viewpoint of others. In this period, which has two substages, intelligence is demonstrated through the use of symbols, language use matures and memory and imagination are developed, but thinking is done in a non-logical, non-reversible manner, that is egocentric thinking predominates. Coming to concrete operational stage, that is from 7 to 11 years. It is also called as elementary and early adolescence. Piaget considered the concrete stage a major turning point in the child's cognitive development because it marks the beginning of logical or operational thought. This means the child can work things out internally in their head rather than physically trying things out in the real world. Children can conserve number, that is age 6, mass at the age 7 and weight at the age 9. Conservation is the understanding that something stays the same in quantity even though its appearance changes. In this stage, categorized by 7 types of conservation: number, length, liquid, mass, weight, area and volume. Intelligence is demonstrated through logical and systematic manipulation of symbols related to concrete objects. Operational thinking develops, that is mental actions that are reversible. Egocentric thought diminishes. The formal operational stage begins at approximately age 11 and lasts into adulthood. During this time, people develop the ability to think about abstract concepts and logically test hypotheses. In this stage, intelligence is demonstrated through the logical use of symbols related to abstract concepts. Early in the period, there is a return to egocentric thought. Only 35% of high school graduates in industrialized countries obtain formal operations. Many people do not think formally during adulthood. Now coming to educational implications. Piaget did not explicitly relate his theory to education, although later researchers have explained how features of Piaget's theory can be applied to teaching and learning. Piaget has been extremely influential in developing educational policy and teaching practice. For example, a review of primary education by the UK government in 1966 was based strongly on Piaget theory. The result of this view led to the publication of the Ploddon report in 1967. Discovery learning, the idea that children learn best through doing and actively exploring, was seen as central to the transformation of the primary school curriculum. The report's recurring themes are individual learning, flexibility in the curriculum, the centrality of play in children's learning, the use of the environment, learning by discovery and the importance of evaluation of children's progress. Teachers should not assume that only what is measurable is valuable, because Piaget's theory is based upon biological maturation and stages. The notion of readiness is important. Readiness concerns when certain information or concept should be taught. According to Piaget theory, children should not be taught certain concepts until they have reached the appropriate stages of cognitive development. According to Piaget, assimilation and accommodation require an active learner, not a passive one, because problem solving skills cannot be taught, they must be discovered. Within the classroom, learning should be student centered, accomplished through active discovery learning. The role of the teacher is to facilitate learning rather than direct tuition. Therefore, teachers should encourage the following within the classroom: the focus on the process of learning rather than the end product of it, using active methods that require rediscovering or reconstructing truths, using collaborative as well as individual activities, that is, so children can learn from each other, devising situations that present useful problems and create disequilibrium in the child, evaluate the level of the children's development so suitable tasks can be set. Now coming to critical evaluation, that to support. The influence of Piaget's ideas in developmental psychology has been enormous. He changed how people viewed the child's world and their methods of studying children. He was an inspiration to many who came after and took up his ideas. Piaget's ideas have generated a huge amount of research which has increased our understanding of cognitive development. His ideas have been of practical use in understanding and communicating with children, particularly in the field of education, that is discovery learning. Now coming to Piaget's theory differs from others in several ways. It is concerned with children rather than all learners. It focuses on development rather than learning, so it does not address learning of information or specific behaviors. It proposes discrete stages of development marked by qualitative differences rather than a gradual increase in number and complexity of behaviors, concepts, ideas and so on. Now coming to criticisms. Are the stages real? Vygotsky and Brunner would rather not talk about stages at all, preferring to see development as a continuous process. Others have queried the age ranges of the stages. Some studies have shown that progress to the formal operational stage is not guaranteed. For example, Keating in 1979 reported that 40 to 60% of college students failed at formal operational tasks, and Dyson in 1994 states that only one-third of adults ever reach the formal operational stage. Because Piaget concentrated on the universal stages of cognitive development and biological maturation, he failed to consider the effect that the social setting and culture may have on cognitive development. Dyson in 1994 cites studies he conducted in remote parts of the central Australian desert with 18 to 14-year-old aborigines. He gave them conservation of liquid tasks and spatial awareness tasks. He found that the ability to conserve came later in the aboriginal children between aged 10 and 13 as opposed to between 5 and 7 with Piaget's Swiss sample. However, he found that spatial awareness abilities developed earlier amongst the aboriginal children than the Swiss children. Such a study demonstrates cognitive development is not purely depend on maturation but on cultural factors too. Spatial awareness is crucial for nomadic groups of people. Vygotsky, a contemporary of Piaget, argued that social interaction is crucial for cognitive development. According to Vygotsky, the child's learning always occurs in a social context in cooperation with someone more skillful. This social interaction provides language opportunities, and language is the foundation of thought. Piaget's methods are more open to biased interpretation than other methods. Piaget made careful, detailed naturalistic observations of children, and from these he wrote diary descriptions charting their development. He also used clinical interviews and observations of older children who were able to understand questions and hold conversations. Because Piaget conducted the observations alone, the data collected are based on his own subjective interpretation of events. It would have been more reliable if Piaget conducted the observations with another researcher and compared the results afterwards to check if they are similar. Although clinical interviews allow the researcher to explore data in more depth, the interpretation of the interviewer may be biased. For example, children may not understand the questions, they have short attention spans, they cannot express themselves very well and may be trying to please the experimenter. Such methods meant that Piaget may have formed inaccurate conclusions. As several studies have shown, Piaget underestimated the abilities of children because his tests were sometimes confusing or difficult to understand. Piaget failed to distinguish between competence and performance. The child can show when given a task. When tasks were altered, performance was affected. Therefore, Piaget may have underestimated children's cognitive abilities. For example, a child might have object permanence but still not able to search for objects. When Piaget hid objects from babies, he found that it was not till after 9 months that they looked for it. However, Piaget relied on manual search methods whether the child was looking for the object or not. Later, research such as Pellegrin and DeVos in 1991 reported that infants as young as 4 months looked longer at a moving carrot that did not do what it expected, suggesting they had some sense of permanence, otherwise they would not have had any expectation of what it should or should not do. The concept of schema is incompatible with the theories of Brunner and Vygotsky. Behaviorism would also refute Piaget's schema theory because it cannot be directly observed as it is an internal process. Therefore, they would claim it cannot be objectively measured. Piaget studied his own children and the children of his colleagues in Geneva in order to deduce general principles about the intellectual development of all children. Not only was his sample very small, but it was composed solely of European children from families of high socio-economic status. Researchers have therefore questioned the generalizability of his data. For Piaget, language is seen as secondary to action, that is, thought precedes language. The Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky argues that development of language and thought go together and that the origin of reasoning is more to do with our ability to communicate with others than with our interaction with the material world. Now, coming to the conclusion, so far we have discussed cognitive ability, Piaget's cognitive ability theory, three components of Piaget's theory, stages of development of Piaget's theory, and the views of Vygotsky, Brunner, Plodin, Keating regarding individual differences of cognitive abilities. I hope you all enjoyed this session. Thank you, viewers.